recommendation. It's nice to see the Minister of Finance listens to some of the MLAs in the legislature. And we, of course, support our volunteer fire departments. I was recently at a dinner in Port Hood where they celebrated 50 years of serving their community. And we are happy that the government is working with them to help them. It's very important because fire departments, as we know, they have the ability and they can claim costs that they incur when responding to motor vehicle accidents. And that's right as per the standard automobile policy. So that's something that already exists, Madam Speaker. And so it's important for government to be assisting those volunteer fire departments to ensure that they are able to make those claims. Because as we know, they have to do a lot of fundraising to maintain their operations, and some benefit from area rates. But those volunteers put their heart and souls into what they do, and they're certainly valued parts of our Nova Scotian communities. We hear that there's going to be a formula that's decided upon by the volunteer fire departments. We think that it's good to have volunteer fire departments involved in that decision making. I must make the comment, though, Madam Speaker, that there was a first responders fund that was reduced by 90% by this government. And that was instituted by the previous Progressive Conservative government to help these volunteer fire departments with the costs of their purchasing equipment, their buildings, capital investments that they make. And we know that volunteer fire departments appreciated that program. And I think it needs to be put on the record here tonight that that was something that this NDP government took away from our volunteer firefighters in this province. And it's important for people to know that. And that's fact. It was taken away, it was reduced by 90%. So, let's see, I probably have some other items to mention here. I do want to say something positive, something from from the Nova Scotia College of Chiropractors. And he mentioned, I'm going to quote him here, this is Dr. Ward McDonald, said, "We know from our experience and research into the treatment of whiplash that more timely care leads to better outcomes and recoveries for patients." And Madam Speaker, this makes sense. It's important for people not to have any delays if they require treatment. The sooner they can be treated, the sooner they can be helped to recover from any injuries. And that saves money, which in turn makes rates more affordable for Nova Scotians. So I did want to mention that.
Order, please. Would the honourable member please table the document they read from and quoted?
Certainly, I will table that.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Yes, yeah. So, Madam Speaker, and I know the minister was speaking earlier, and I was actually about to start to blush because I thought he was speaking about me when he was referring to the member in this House that knows a lot about auto insurance and about the Act, and I thought he was going to be referring to the recommendations I had been making to him in the spring of 2010 around adopting Alberta's injury diagnostic and treatment protocols, because we see that he's obviously listened to me because he's taken that advice and incorporated that into his changes, and those are significant, Madam Speaker. I do thank him. I want to thank him for thinking of me and remembering that I made that recommendation. So there is, and one thing I'll say about that, and I still have my old notes, Madam Speaker. I suppose I could table those as well at some point. But I think I should give you a cleaner copy of it here. But the medical panels in Alberta that were used, they used best evidence to support physicians in making diagnosis and recommending treatments. Essentially, it helped to reduce it helped to make things clearer for physicians when they were making their judgments on cases, and that helped with the legislative system. So it was clearer legislation that helped to improve the auto insurance for users in Alberta, and we thought, why not bring it here to Nova Scotia? and that's why I'd recommended it, and I'm pleased to see it now being incorporated. So I guess, Madam Speaker, not all the Conservative ideas are bad. So we see that the NDP are incorporating some of them. So one final point, and we didn't hear the minister speak about it, but my colleague with the Liberal caucus had mentioned it, and that is the optional full tort coverage. The big question, Madam Speaker, is how much is it going to cost? And if it's going to be very expensive, which we predict it will be out of reach for most Nova Scotians. So that kind of defeats the purpose of having it. But we'll let the market, and I guess the minister is going to let the market decide what that is going to be, and we'll watch curiously to see if that is in fact the case. With that, Madam Speaker, I will conclude my remarks.
I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak this evening on Bill number 86, dealing with automobile insurance. I'm reluctant to use the word of the bill because I question whether that's actually what's going to happen. Government's clever in calling it fair automobile insurance, but Nova Scotians, I think, will be the true judges as to whether these changes will be seen as fair or not. Madam Speaker, I have to say that it is my hope that listening to the Minister of Finance's speech, I was thinking to myself, I certainly hope that he doesn't suffer himself a soft tissue injury from patting himself on the back from what we heard this evening. But, Mr. Speaker, I would remind the Minister as well that there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because I think he should spend more time listening to what Nova Scotians are saying rather than preaching to them as to what is good for them. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that continues to send mixed messages to Nova Scotians, to their supporters, as to where they stand on a whole variety of issues. Because when I heard the minister speak, and I have to say it's probably one of the more political speeches I've heard ministers, especially on a bill that they're introducing, his continued references to the former Progressive Conservative government and his attacks against our party, you know, they were nothing less than cheap, Madam Speaker, is the best way to describe them. And Nova Scotians listening will judge them for themselves. Mr. Speaker, back then, around 2003, Nova Scotians were facing insurance costs that they simply could no longer afford. And they were asking all elected members to work together to find a solution to bring down insurance rates in Nova Scotia. Now, we were not the government of the day. It was a minority government that was there. We could have easily said, we want no part of this. We're going to do like the NDP, and we're not going to try to work towards a solution. Instead, something was brought forward that the industry said will bring down rates for consumers. And we thought the responsible thing in answering to the concerns of Nova Scotians at the time of the crisis was to be supportive of it. So tonight we heard the Minister of Finance say how that was all terrible, what horrible things it did for Nova Scotians. Yet I have to say, I'm not sure who he's hearing that from, because I can tell you the constituents I spoke to in Richmond County on the weekend were quite content with what they're paying for insurance. They're not complaining. But I'll get into one of the complaints they shared with me based on this government's actions. But let's go back, because when the Minister of Finance was taking his digs at the former Conservative government and taking his digs at the Liberal caucus, he forgot to tell us what was the NDP position back then to deal with the auto insurance crisis. He forgot, and not once in his speech did he mention the words public auto, because public auto insurance is what the NDP believed in. Now, that's just one of the things that they used to believe in that all of a sudden they've forgotten along the way. Under conversion to government, they've forgotten about. But it was all about public auto. And hopefully, as we go on debating this bill, we may have the opportunity to go back through Hansard and to quote the Minister of Finance, the Premier, member for Halifax-Shabukto, many others on why public auto was the salvation for Nova Scotians.
I remember.
Yet suddenly, this government has completely abandoned that idea. And ironically, they've never really told us why. What is it about public auto they no longer believe in? Why is it that they're trying to tinker with a system which they told us back in 2003 forward was broken and just would not work?
We don't know why.
Now suddenly, here are some amendments trying to play with that same private system that we have in Nova Scotia. So then one has to ask, is that the only thing that this party said in opposition or before they got elected government? Now, we all know, Mr. Speaker, that's not the case. They said that they wouldn't increase taxes, yet we now have the highest combined tax in the entire country. They are a government that used to criticize the former Conservative government for raising user fees outside of this legislature, not debating it here, and having to be accountable to the people in Nova Scotia. And the minute they got elected, they did the exact same thing. 1,400 user fees. No rhyme or reason as to why they were increasing them. Some were minor increases. Others were increases that clearly showed that they were a tax and not a reflection of the service being provided to Nova Scotians. And had they brought it here in this chamber, we could have gone through each and every one of those 14 user fees and pointed that out. Yet instead, the Minister of Finance hid in his office and made the announcement from there and refused to be accountable to the legislature, something that he stood in his place in opposition and criticized. So again, when one looks at his comments made earlier, it's important to keep in mind what exactly this government said in opposition and what they've done while they've been in government. But this is also a government, you'll recall, that told Nova Scotians in the campaign, we will balance the budget. Yet here we are, still waiting for a balanced budget and still getting excuses from the Minister of Finance. But it was interesting because at least tonight we heard the Minister of Finance speak, because apparently in question period, he's not interested in speaking anymore. Last session, he used to laugh and say, oh, the opposition doesn't ask me questions. I'm lonely over here, because we know not many of his colleagues talk to him a lot, so he was lonely because we weren't asking him questions. But since that time, he's seen a tax increase, user fee increase, cuts to education, cuts to health, cuts to Department of Justice, cuts to transportation. So in any other parliament, the Minister of Finance would be the one standing and telling Nova Scotians, here's why we have to do this. But this Minister of Finance is clever. He said, no. I didn't give any directives to make cuts. I'm the Minister of Finance. I'm not responsible for the finances of this province. It's the Minister of Education that decided to cut 3%. It's the Minister of Health that decided to cut 3%. It's the Minister of Justice that decided to undertake the single largest cut to any government department in the last budget. And now it's the Minister of Transportation who's decided less salt for Nova Scotia roads because he feels that he should be pitching in. He wants to help the province, but obviously this is a government, it must be run almost like a cooperative, that they all collectively make decisions about the finances, which begs the question, Nova Scotians, why bother having a finance minister if each department is taking care of its own finances and making its own decisions? As I mentioned last week, in case any of the government members didn't hear, I believe the Minister of Finance is trying to isolate himself from the decisions, the unpopular decisions of this government. And it was quite ironic because I know the deputy or the government house leader said at the time, no, we're not like liberals. And it was interesting he'd make that comment because that was the same day where Alexa McDonough announced her endorsement for Peggy Nash, leaving poor Robert Chisholm out in the cold in Dartmouth Coal Harbour. So, you know, I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what we could change to our insurance system that would better ensure Robert Chisholm's chances of winning the federal NDP leadership, seeing the silence of Alexa McDonough saying thanks but no thanks. So, and I do believe, Mr. Speaker, and I've said that to many, that the federal leadership campaign will show Nova Scotians once and for all the NDP really are not any different at all. And this will come back to haunt them, some of the comments that they've made earlier. And Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that in years down the road, the next government in Nova Scotia will reflect on the comments made by the Minister of Finance, and hopefully they will show more class in their comments about what impact that has had than what we heard from the Minister of Finance tonight when you had a government of the day trying to deal with a crisis and then you had an opposition party that could have easily played politics and done like the NDP and said we want no part of a solution. Instead, we did what we could to help. And history will judge, was it a good decision or bad decision? But as I said, none of my constituents are complaining about their insurance rates right now. What was the message on the weekend? The changes being made by the NDP better not cost me more money. That was the message. Power rates are going up while this government does absolutely nothing. They've raised the HST. They're still having the tax on gasoline that they called immoral when they were in opposition, and now they're tinkering with an insurance system. It better not cost me any more money. That is the message. And I believe that is the message that all Nova Scotians want to send to this government. Now, there's no doubt we want to see enhanced benefits for Nova Scotians who are injured or who suffer a loss as a result of an automobile accident. But at this time, with the economy so fragile, with Nova Scotians having seen their investments take serious losses because of market conditions, who are seeing the cost of living under this government continually increase, the thought of the government now saying we're going to change the insurance system and you have to wait to see what the impact will be on your rates. That is what is the most scary part of these changes. Because as I said, yes, the Section B benefits, there's no question they're outdated. There's no question that they don't reflect the financial reality that most Nova Scotians find themselves in. But what is going to be the added cost of better Section B benefits? We still don't know. And that is the concern, because until we know the price, the minister can stand there all he wants and talk about fairness, affordability, and stability. We have to see the price first, and that's what we're still waiting. And I have to tell you, I found it ironic that the minister would stand in his place and say that the rates will be set by the Utility and Review Board, so Nova Scotians can sleep well at night. Well, I can tell you, this is the same government telling us to sleep well at night because Nova Scotia Power's rates are being set by the Utility Review Board, and that hasn't been such a good deal for Nova Scotia families up to now. And I can tell you, gas regulation being administered by Utility and Review Board hasn't worked so well for Nova Scotia families and hasn't been much of a deal either. So I have to say, I don't have that much confidence in seeing insurance rates being reasonable when the government is going to hide again behind the Utility and Review Board and stand in this House and say, oh, I'm sorry, we're not responsible for this, it's the Utility and Review Board. But they'll say they're going to be at the hearings, though. They're going to be there watching, like they've been there watching for the power rate hearings. Watching them go up is what they've basically been doing. And then when it comes to insurance rates, they'll watch them go up as well, but they'll say that they're there fighting for Nova Scotians.
They can't interfere.
But they can't interfere because it's independent. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are telling us time and time again that being able to stay in their own homes is almost impossible due to the costs that they are facing on everyday items. And when this government came out with the heating assistance rebate, which was an opportunity there, considering the extra revenue they're bringing in from the HST, the extra revenue they're bringing in from the tax on gas, they said $200 is what poor Nova Scotians will receive to help them heat their homes, even though the price of oil continues to go up, and we can only expect that it may go even higher. So once again, there was an opportunity to help out, to try to ease the financial burden on Nova Scotia families, and this government said, no thanks. Let us keep in mind, and the Minister of Finance knows well, that barely 60% of Nova Scotians and Nova Scotia families that qualify for the heating assistance rebate actually apply. And that's been the case for years. So I'm not going to say it's just under this government, because it was way back when we were in government, which is why we've said to the previous Conservative government, and we say again, there needs to be a better way of getting that money into the pockets of Nova Scotia families, because asking them to apply is not bringing the results that we need. But it's great if you're the Minister of Finance, because while you're saying, here's how much money I've put there for Nova Scotia families, and you know that less than 70% are going to apply, well, there's a nice 30% that you know will come back to government coffers and will never be spent. And I have to say, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, that that'll probably happen again this year. But I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that we've done everything in Richmond County to get the message out, from the paper to the radio, to the community station, to the parish bulletins, to our Facebook site, every opportunity we have to try to make sure that families know that if they qualify, this is available for them. But unfortunately, numbers across the province still show that it's less than 70%, in some cases barely 60%, that actually apply. Let me go back, because as I was talking about some of the promises and the comments made by the NDP while in opposition that they've suddenly forgotten about, is some of my colleagues may remember that they said how horrible the $2,500 cap on soft tissue injury was. And all the Nova Scotians who were injured and fell under that cap, this was the government and the party that said, if we get in government, we're going to review that right away. And in fact, we're going to look at retroactivity. So vote for us, and we're going to take care of Nova Scotians who were injured and who fell under the cap. So what happened? Once they got in office, the Minister of Finance said, we're going to increase the cap. Not remove it, but we're going to increase it to $7,500. Well, I can tell you, I can't think of any Nova Scotian who's injured that gets $7,500 is going to join the NDP in saying, here, here. Because there's nothing to brag about, $7,500. But then as they're listening to that announcement, all the injured Nova Scotians who fell under the cap are like, okay, what about us? Remember, the Premier said, the leader of the NDP, they're going to take care of us. I think the Minister of Finance said that the leader of the NDP was one of the most knowledgeable people on insurance in this province. So they're listening to him and it's like, okay, he's got a solution for us. And what was the solution from the NDP now when they're in government? Sorry, can't do anything. No retroactivity for you. Thanks for the support though. Thanks for the vote. But no support for you. So that's just one more example of what this government said, what this party said in opposition, what they've done in government. And when I hear members of the NDP get up and talk about how pure of a party they are and how they've taken care of the people, well, let them go see those injured Nova Scotians who fell under the cap that the NDP said was immoral, was horrible. And what have they done? They've kept the cap in place. They've only increased it by $5,000. Let the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island go tell those injured Nova Scotians, we have completely abandoned you. And even though they raised the cap, they didn't go back retroactive to those who had been hurt before. So they were left out. One more broken promise. But that's just part of a broken record that I believe you're going to be hearing about more and more when it comes to the NDP and to what they've done to Nova Scotians. How things were when they were in opposition and how things are now when they're in government. One of the questions that was asked is, are they trying to make changes to the insurance system that will increase the costs to create a new crisis so that they can once again haul out the argument of public auto insurance? Only time will tell. We're at least putting it on the record today, so someone down the road will be able to go back and say, oh yeah, they had that discussion and there was that fear, and it may have come true. Because not once in his comments did the minister say, we have abandoned the concept of public auto insurance. It was wrong. We were wrong. It wasn't good for Nova Scotians then. We've concluded it's not good for Nova Scotians now, so it's off the table. But they're clever enough that they never say that. So it always leaves us wondering, is it really off the table, or is it still something that this government believes in? Because the flip-flops that we've seen of what they said in opposition, what they've done in government, I've listed but a few examples this evening, more to come as we go on this bill and other pieces of legislation. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, the last thing Nova Scotians need right now is an added expense. And the question is going to come down, I believe the member for Inverness was rightly in pointing out, will the enhanced benefits and the enhanced ability to sue, the cost associated with that, will it only be the wealthier Nova Scotians that will have access to that, and those of lesser financial means will be told, sorry, but you're stuck in the old system because you can't afford to pay the additional premiums? One would think at this time in our history, with what's happening in the last number of weeks with some of the protests and that, I'm not sure this would be the opportune time to be creating a system that once again distinguishes between the classes that exist in our society, but this bill has the potential of doing exactly that, because it will be optional. So if you have the ability to pay, you can pay to get better protection. If you don't have the ability to pay, you will be left with the less expensive system that will be there. And the cap. One of the other issues which I was surprised that the minister, I don't believe I heard in his comments, was I didn't hear him saying anything about facility insurance. Now, those who've been in the House for a little while will remember this is what happens if you're downgraded by your insurer, or you're put as a high risk, you're put into facility insurance. Most Nova Scotians who watch the chamber would know about facility insurance from listening to the Minister of Finance when he was the finance critic in opposition, giving the horror stories of Nova Scotians who had missed a payment or somehow for minor reasons were thrown into this facility insurance and this extraordinary rates they were being charged. Yet, with all of the changes he's proposed, I haven't heard one mention about facility insurance or providing better protection for Nova Scotians. So apparently, that's something that got forgotten along the way by the minister. He certainly spoke enough about it when he was on this side of the House, but now in government, apparently, it's not the big concern that it is. For those Nova Scotians who've been downgraded to facility insurance, I assure you, it still remains a major concern for them. So once again, this is legislation where Nova Scotians are being told, we're going to pass the bill, and then we're going to set the rules and the regulations, and we'll wait to see what's going to come back from industry. Mr. Speaker, that's a method that while in opposition, the NDP would have argued against. They would have said, why don't you bring it forward as a package, regulations ready to go, so that Nova Scotians clearly know what's going to happen here, how it's going to roll out, how it will impact them, and that'll give an opportunity for the industry to be able to react and to tell Nova Scotians, here are the exact rates that it's going to cost you. You know, but instead, the government says, wait, we'll do the regulations after. There might be some changes in the regulations. It might be changes. And then, what exactly is the industry going to charge Nova Scotians as a result? But that's something that I'll have the opportunity on that very subject to possibly speak more on another piece of legislation from the Minister of Justice, where he himself will present a bill and then tell Nova Scotians, wait to find out the exact details in the regulations, which I will have more opportunity to speak at length about that specific bill. But again, Mr. Speaker, the message from Nova Scotians is loud and clear. These changes better not cost us any more money. And the fact that the Minister of Finance cannot stand in his place today and say this will not increase rates should be of concern to all Nova Scotians. Because as he has said, it is mandatory to have auto insurance in this province to operate a vehicle. But I should add that this government also has to look at the problem of many Nova Scotians who operate motor vehicles without insurance because of the costs, which is a terrible thing, because for innocent Nova Scotians who are involved in accidents only to find out that the other party has no insurance, the government has failed to address any sort of strategy as to how they're going to deal and crack down on making sure that Nova Scotians are not operating a motor vehicle without the proper amount of liability coverage before they get behind the wheel. So with those few brief remarks, Mr. Speaker, As I indicated, you know, I won't bother tabling my notes because it's written on the back of this envelope, so I don't think you'll ask me to table that. But, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, I'm not going to apologize to the Minister of Finance for having been responsible as an opposition party when a crisis existed back in 2003 to try to find relief for Nova Scotians. Today, that crisis is not there, yet the Minister is bringing about reforms which only time will tell what impact they are going to have on Nova Scotians' pocketbooks. The future years, legislators will have the opportunity to judge the Minister of Finance and the changes proposed today. But what our message is loud and clear. These changes better not cost Nova Scotians more money, because this government has certainly done its part to take enough out of the pockets of Nova Scotians and make life harder for Nova Scotia families in their 2 years in office. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to continuing debate on Bill number 86. Merci.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the vast depth and breadth of knowledge about the insurance system that my honourable colleague does. Excuse me? However, I did want to bring to the legislature a concern of a constituent of mine. This young woman was in an accident during the period where the cap was only $2,500. And she was in an accident, her vehicle was hit by a truck. And at the time of the accident, she was a student at Acadia University, and she was doing extremely well. The aftermath of that accident has left her in severe pain. She can't even carry her books to class, and she is unable to continue her studies at the level she had formerly. Unfortunately, because the cap existed at $2,500 at the time, she has not been able to receive adequate treatment. Her family's medical insurance rapidly runs out each year for this particular condition. And her mother contacted me because she said, there's been no justice for my daughter. My daughter is trying to, carry on as a student, and she's limited. And this was in the period after which the NDP had raised the cap to $7,500. But this student is left in some kind of legal limbo, some kind of no man's land. And this particular, the bill, the changes that the NDP brought in when they first came into office, and these subsequent changes do nothing for her. During the election, the NDP was talking about retroactivity for these people, and somehow that has evaporated. And for this young woman, there's been no help at all. And so I wonder, where's the justice for her? What about that group of people who are orphans, legal orphans of the system, who are left out in the cold by the changes that have been introduced? Interestingly enough, my colleague from Richmond raised the specter of public insurance. And we all wonder when we see changes, is this the first step down the road? Interestingly, I was just on the phone with a constituent whose son has just moved to British Columbia. And, I was saying, how's he doing? And she said, well, he really loves it out there. But what a shock that public auto insurance program is out there. When he was here, he paid about $1,000 a year for his car to be insured. Out there, it's $3,600. How much? $3,600, if you can imagine. Not 3 times, more than 3 times what he was paying back here in Nova Scotia. So that would be $3,600 for my colleague who didn't hear, and it was $1,000 here. So as you can imagine, that was a bit of a shock for him moving to British Columbia, where she noted he has many more job opportunities. She said, I hated to see him go, but I had to let him go because there just weren't the job opportunities for him here. And so he's moved out there. We've lost yet another Nova Scotian, and what a tragedy that is. I talked to his mother, and she said, I really miss him. He's out there. But I've sort of wandered off topic a little bit. But given the chance to talk as a mother, I have to say that I hate hearing about talented young people who move to other provinces and where they may have to pay more for auto insurance. But it's so sad to see that one of Nova Scotia's biggest exports turns out to be our young people. You know, and despite the fact that we are going to get, whenever the contract is actually negotiated, we are going to see some more jobs come in here. In the meantime, we are seeing more jobs flow out the door. And certainly, while the Ship Start Here program indicated that we would need, I think it was 19.5, no, maybe it was 24 24 more insurance brokers as a result of the activity that would be generated down at the shipyard. I do think that that we should be careful about the changes that we're making right here to the Automobile Insurance Act, because when we make changes, as happened when the cap was introduced, when it was only $2,500, we can leave people out. And I'm sure that the former government did not intend that people be left out. And I'm sure that when this government raised the cap to $7,500, they thought they were, you know, doing a good thing. But the fact of the matter is, there are some people who've been left out, and it's affecting their lives. You know, I guess it was 2.5 years ago, my middle child, my daughter, was injured in a sports accident at university, and she sustained a massive concussion, which is also what this young woman from Acadia had. And it took her between 16 and 18 months to recover, and she's pretty much recovered from it now. But she didn't have any soft tissue injury. She simply had a concussion, and it devastated her marks for a year, and it left her unable to read for longer than 5 minutes. And that's the kind of injury that this young woman has, in addition to other injuries. And I just think it's, when we look at young people who are in the prime of their life, and if we fail to protect them, if we fail to give them what they need to be able to move on from a devastating injury like that, I don't think we're doing our jobs. And I think it would be, for us to simply say this is a wonderful thing and whatever you're doing is right, I think we would not be doing our jobs here on the opposite side. Our job is to hold the government to account. Our job is to speak truth to power. And the government needs to hear that there's a problem, that there are problems with these changes. And they should be consulting with Nova Scotians to see what changes they should be looking at. We know that there's a group of people who have been left out as a result of the cap being at only $2,500. And because the government campaigned on retroactivity, they should live up to that obligation. They should make sure that the changes that are ultimately passed here, because they have the power, they can change things, reflect what is needed. I know that for those of us who've watched a family member struggle with an injury, and actually in this very chamber on Saturday, we had a group of Girl Guides who came in to meet with women parliamentarians, and several of the ministers were here, and several of us from the opposition side were here. And we heard a very moving, all of the members talked about their background, how they got into politics. And we heard a very moving story from one of the ministers about being in a car accident and what the pain and suffering she endured, I think it was for 7 years following that injury. And And so any of us who've ever seen a family member or a loved one or a friend go through that kind of pain and suffering, we don't want our children to be going through that. We don't want our friends to be going through that. So I would ask the government to consider making a change to this legislation that would deal with retroactivity, because there's a group of people who've been left out in the cold and who need their assistance. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hadn't intended to speak on this bill this evening, but when my honourable colleague was talking about the Public Utilities Board going to set the prices for insurance, it sure struck a tone that is sort of scary for me. When you look at the job they've done with power rates in Nova Scotia, and you see the power rate's gone up 36.2%, I believe it is, since 2000, with the Public Utilities Board looking after the cost and the regulation on the electricity. And at the same time, the Nova Scotia Power has given over $1 billion to Emera in that same time. And Nova Scotians are paying this bill. Look at the gas regulation. Gas typically is higher price in Nova Scotia than any of the neighboring provinces. So it makes you wonder if you're going to be really assured and see that your insurance is going to be reasonable. Well, I'm just in the process of paying my insurance for the year, and it's a scary number. And luckily, so far, at least up until this evening, I haven't had any accidents, and we haven't had any accidents in our household for a long time. We have no young people there driving. So I'm afraid when the Public Utilities Board gets a hold of this, it's going to be a very expensive proposition for Nova Scotians. And I want to talk again about people I see in my office now. You know, we've seen the 2% GST increase, which took $200 away for every $10,000 you clear after taxes, automatically taking the $200 away. You've seen the fee increases that the province has put on almost everything, and some of them. I remember a small utilities trailer was 2 fee increases in a month. I don't know what happened there. And I remember too when I was over in the Red Chamber, we were talking about the estimates, and the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Affairs, who I was asking questions to, admitted that it was strictly a tax, and they were instructed to put the tax up on these fees because the Minister of Finance said to do it. You know, that's quite interesting. The Minister of Finance the whole time was saying, no, these fees are, you know, the cost, we have to really do that. So when I started asking the Minister about that, he indicated they didn't really know what the costs were, and indeed was a directive from the Minister of Finance and the Department of Finance put fees up. In other words, a tax increase. And I remember in this House when the Minister of Finance and other members in the government there now, around at that time, got up and railed on about the government, the Conservative government, putting fees up without bringing it to the legislature to discuss it. Lo and behold, they come, and what do? Do exactly the same thing. And we did find out, with the estimates, I believe the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations to be a very honest man. And indeed, he told the truth. He told the truth. He was directed by the Minister of Finance to put the fees up. So you take these fees and add those onto the cost of Nova Scotians. That's your driver's license, your vehicle registration, basically anything you need to get done in this province. And indeed, you have a higher cost to live in Nova Scotia. That's scary. It's scary. And this is starting to play out in my office. When I see people in my office, 90% of the people we see in our office now are having financial difficulty. Financial difficulty. I was talking to a friend of mine today that buys oil. I don't buy oil, luckily, but buys oil to heat their home with. Last year, they told me it was 66 cents a liter, that the price they got for it. This year, it's 99 cents. That's a 50% increase, 50% increase. When this government across here come into power, gasoline, $1 a liter, $1.27 today, it's 27% increase, 27% increase. Double-digit increase in costs, double-digit. And what's happening, people don't realize that all of a sudden they don't have enough money to pay their bills. So if this insurance rates go up, as everything else is that the Public Utilities Board is looking after, proportionately, it's going to be another real serious burden on Nova Scotians. And will that mean that they won't insure their homes? I know I've had several people in my riding that couldn't afford to insure their homes, and some of them burnt. And there they are, all their belongings gone, their home gone, and no insurance to pay for it. Are there going to be more people like that that can't afford to pay the insurance? Especially on auto insurance. If someone has an accident, and really, how much is it going to increase it? And I say I have no faith in the Public Utilities Board to keeping this under control. And it's this government directing this with the endless taxes they're putting on people, the extra cost burdens that they're having on communities and the families. It's unbelievable. And as time goes on, it's going to show. It's going to start showing in the economy. We talked about jobs here before. We talked about businesses not wanting to locate in Nova Scotia. Well, actually, there's businesses don't want to locate here, but even worse than that, a lot of the good companies are moving out of the province because they can't afford to operate here anymore. The labor laws they put in place are just unbelievable. And if you run a small business today, which is the backbone of business in Nova Scotia, you really can't afford to operate here. Get all the extra fees and all the extra services that the government's imposing on them. It's hard to believe that that the economy is doing as well as it is, and it's not doing well. It's not doing well now. The Minister of Tourism said last year, I clearly remember it, tourism is doing great. It's not going to slide at all. When the numbers come out, huge decrease. The whole time we're talking about the ferry being canceled by this government. Canceled by this government. Oh, it doesn't have any effect on anybody. Well, I don't have very many beds and breakfasts and tourism operations in my riding, but everyone I talked to was a significant decrease in their bookings. And that means a significant decrease in their income. And when the income goes down, that means they hire fewer people, they have less money to spend on renovations or work that they may do, or whatever they're going to do with the funds they have, if indeed they can make ends meet. So when you add all these costs in and see what's happening to the average Nova Scotian, the better deal for today's families, that has a real nice ring to it. Better deal for today's families. Higher taxes, more regulations, higher fees, everything under the sun that this government said they wouldn't do. Said they wouldn't do it. Power rates are up, gasoline's up. You know, tax on tax. I mean, you've got so many taxes now and so restrictive on what people can do. It's getting to the point that it's not worth living in Nova Scotia. And I don't like to say that because I'm a staunch Nova Scotian. I believe that this is a beautiful province and a wonderful opportunity. You know, I want to talk about tourism a little bit again too. When you talk about the ferry in Yarmouth, there's so many negative things that have happened from that. But yet this government, we got this team all put together that's going to save the world. We're putting all kinds of money in it. Made a few announcements. Still no ferry. Some of the hotels have closed down. And all those hotels that have closed means that there's fewer people working. So if fewer people working, that means that the money they would spend in the grocery stores, in the work they would have done in their homes, or even on their auto insurance, in that case, they're not going to be able to pay these bills. And as this continues, the better deal for today's families don't look very good. It's a horrible situation this province has been created. You know, you see, my colleague here also talked about young people leaving the province. It's a reality. There's jobs there. There's going to be fewer jobs here. And, you know, I talked before about the wonderful shipbuilding contract that Irving got. They don't really have the contract yet. Hopefully they do get it. They get the right to negotiate it. Right to negotiate. That's not a written contract. And then I quoted numbers in here. I believe it was 1,900 at the prime, the height of the contract. New people at Irving was going to employ. Evidently, the Vice President of Irving disagreed with my numbers. And unfortunately, my numbers are better than his. He said there's going to be 1,200 people at the Irving shipyard in the prime of this contract, and that's in 2020. There's going to be 1,200 new jobs there, and within 2 to 3 years from that, it's going to drop down 300 jobs from there. So you're going to have 900 new jobs. So there'll be some spin-off jobs, a lot of work that'll be done outside the province, but at least I want to commend Irving for doing the job and being honest with Nova Scotians and let them know really what the economic impact is going to be. And, you know, as I said before, we've got a lot of time between now and the time the contracts are going to be let. You see the federal government now closing departments down, cutting budgets everywhere. They may decide that this huge contract for building chips may only be half the size it is. Who knows? Anything can happen in this country as a crisis, and you see crisis in the country. You know, and you tie all these things together, and then you see the pulp and paper mills that are struggling. Hopefully some kind of solution can be brought to place there. But if these pulp and paper mills close, there's going to be a far greater economic negative impact on Nova Scotia than the shipbuilding contract could ever replace. We'd have to be building 5 or 6 times as many ships to replace those people that are working in the pulp industry. Now, you know, as you go through the whole process and you get back to the better deal for today's families, well, the people I see in my office, they're struggling to pay their mortgage, struggling to heat their homes, struggling to insure their homes and their vehicles. They're just simply struggling. And anyone on the government side here that don't believe this, you're not talking to your constituents, because this is real. This is real. It's really happened to people. You know, yeah, they got the big $200 tax credit deal on the fuel. It was $4.50. They took it down to $200, but yet the price of fuel has gone from, well, from what I heard today, and this may not be accurate, from 66 cents a liter last year to 99 cents this year. So that's, you know, that's a 50% increase. So you don't have to buy much fuel to eat up $200, and actually won't buy enough fuel to do hardly anything. And as it gets more and more difficult, more and more expensive to do things here, people that are working are having more and more difficulty as time goes on. And insurance, yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll bring it back to insurance, not a problem. So, you know, as I'm talking about this, it's very relevant, because if the Public Utilities Board puts the price of insurance up for the average Nova Scotian, it means they may not even get insurance. So if somebody is driving with no insurance, which it does still happen today, and they run into somebody with no insurance, well, guess who the losers are going to be on that? All the people that pay into insurance are going to end up paying for it. And the people that are injured may have a very, very, very difficult time getting anything out of it, never mind $7,500. They may not get anything. And indeed, it could cause a long, serious problem. So all these things are interconnected. When you look at the Public Utilities Board and what they're doing with the other things that they look after, and it makes you wonder how it can be just for a better deal for Nova Scotia families. You know, that has a nice ring to it. Fewer jobs, more taxes, and we can go on a lot of things. But in reality I think this government has lost touch with people, has really lost touch with people. They don't understand what people are struggling with to keep their homes, to feed their families, and to look after their children. If you take a family of 4, 2 people working at a minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage, have a modest home, 1 vehicle that they need to travel back and forth to work with, they can't afford to hardly do anything. They can't afford to put their children in any sports, which is very, very important. They can't afford to probably buy a new appliance if they need a new appliance. Tax has gone up on that 2%, so that'll cost them a lot more than it did before. They can't afford to do the things that they need to do to ensure that their family are living healthy and happy lives, and ensuring that they're being able to survive in this environment. Well, I think it's just going to be a matter of time, just a matter of time. And I think it's going to be a very short time before we see people in this province say we've had enough. We've had enough of this government, and we've had enough of these increased taxes and fees and all the service that we're going to have. So it's going to be interesting to see how much the insurance goes up. And when it starts being regulated by Public Utilities Board, who knows? Maybe the insurance company's got a big daddy somewhere in Ontario or down the States that they're going to have to send millions of dollars to every year, like a Nova Scotia Power does to Emera. I'm going to remind you again what that number is. From 2000 to today, $1 billion went to Emera. $1 billion out of Nova Scotians' pockets. $1 billion. That's a lot of money out of Nova Scotia's pocket. A lot of money. And when you look at the increase in the power rates, 36.2%, which I stated before. So if you're paid in 2000, a $100 bill for power, you're now paying $136.20 for that same power. The exact same power. That's a huge increase. Wages haven't gone up 36% in that time. They haven't. What about somebody who's retired? What about someone's on a fixed income? That they're struggling every day now. You add another 2% onto the cost of them for the year, and GST did. Oh, I forgot about the income tax increases. The income tax is indexed in this province, so the highest income taxes in the country. So that's going up every year. When we tally all these up, I did a quick calculation today. If you look back before this government, just before this government took power, and you had $10,000 of income after income tax, and they took, actually it wouldn't be 10,000 anymore because they took some more in income tax. It'll be less than 10,000 that you used to get. By the time you take the $200 off for GST, you take the extra money off for fuel that you're paying now, and I add all these things together, you're probably down around $7,000 to $8,000 in actual disposable income you can use. Now think about that. That's just in a couple of years. So that is a lot of money. That's a lot of money that's gone out of Nova Scotia's pockets. Again, a better deal for Nova Scotia's families. A better deal. Has a nice ring, but the deal is more taxes, better deal for the government. I don't know what they're spending the money on, but anyway. Sure is not paving roads outside their own ridings. Yeah, what happened to public auto insurance? That's right. They were going to do public auto, and my colleague here from Bedford indicated, a friend of hers, son is in Nova Scotia, was $1,000 for insurance here under private system, and in BC was over $3,000 for the same coverage and the same person, the same driving record. So that's public insurance really working well. So, all these things that's a better deal for today's families are providing are pretty scary. They're scary. What's going to happen to the senior citizen that can't afford to pay for their home anymore because of all these costs accumulating, and all of a sudden they're going to lose their home? Work their whole lives, maybe a single person in the family, a husband or a wife, the survivor, and they're wondering why they can't pay their bills anymore. When you take all the costs that this government's imposed on them, over and above what's there, you're going to see some very serious issues for families. And I can guarantee you I'm seeing it now. I am seeing it now. We're seeing lots of financial difficulties. And when you talk to people and ask them what the problem is, they don't really know. But I guarantee you, we're going to tell them what's going on. We're going to let them know who has put the taxes up. We're going to ensure that they know. And we're going to let them know what this better deal for Nova Scotia's families are. And I can tell you, when they finally figure it out, there's going to be very few of the people sitting on the other side after the next election that are here now. Very, very few. So it's going to be interesting when all this deal comes out, and who's going to have to straighten this mess out. That's going to be the problem. It's going to be a serious mess to clean up. It's just all the costs that people have had, and all the things that they are living with and not realizing what the costs are from. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to adjourn debate and continue at the further day on this very important topic. Thank you.
The motion for adjournment has been made. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today. And following the daily routine, we will, following the daily routine, Mr. Speaker, we will be doing Bill 86, Bill 90, Bill 93, Bill 94, Bill 95, I wish you to now rise to meet from the hours of 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Thank you, Mr.
The motion for adjournment has been made. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. We will now adjourn to sit between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. tomorrow.